On February 5th, 2013, a flaming blimp disappeared over the Paris skyline. Its singular passenger was nowhere to be found. Many investigations, theories, and speculations have sprung forth from this bizarre event. Unfortunately, over 10 years have passed, and still, there are no answers to be found. But the question still remains: where is Sly Cooper? You may or may not be familiar with the Sly Cooper franchise, but for me personally, it is one of my favorite franchises. I grew up with it. I played it as a kid so much and ended up loving the games. If you'd ask the average Sly Cooper fan, they would rate either number 2 or number 3 as the best Sly Cooper games, and number 4, Thieves in Time, as the worst Sly Cooper game. I'm not just any regular old fan. Personally, I loved Sly 4, but at the same time I am kind of basic because I put Sly 2 as the absolute best game. If I would have to rank them, it would be 2, then 4, then 1, then 3. And I feel like that's going to be a little bit of a hot take, but whatever. You have the freedom to have bad taste. But since Sly 4 is one of my favorite Sly Cooper games, I was devastated that we have not yet received a 5th game. I mean, it's left on a cliffhanger. Sly is in Egypt. We have to do something about this. Now, with the recent release of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus on the PS4 and PS5, I don't know, it's got me nostalgic, it's got me hopeful, and it got me thinking of what Sly 5 potentially could be. Basically, what this video is going to be is just me listing the ancestors that I think Sly could potentially visit in Sly 5. Now, obviously, the one ancestor that we know could be in Sly 5, if it ever were to exist, would be Slighton Common. Maybe the first one or the second one. I would guess the first one. We see his backstory in Sly 1. He actually came up with the technique of invisibility that Sly gets to use at the end of the game. Invisibility allows him to hide from his enemies. Now, Sly is in ancient Egypt, so if we're potentially to get a Sly 5, they have to go get him. Now, I heard some speculation from a bunch of different videos that apparently there was going to be a DLC for Egypt, and Egypt was supposed to be originally in Sly 4. One of the things introduced in Sly 4 is the use of costumes from the different eras that you can use to navigate throughout the overworlds and different levels to get special access to things. If there was going to be a costume in the ancient Egypt world, I think one of the options could be a mummy costume where Sly is walking around. Perhaps he can play dead and that can hide from guards. Perhaps he can use his wrappings like, I don't know, something to swing from, like an Indiana Jones whip thing, and then is able to access higher areas by swinging on it. A longer reach than his cane would have if he's jumping onto the hoops and whatnot. The next ancestor that I would love to see in a Sly Cooper game is one that has caught my attention every single time this ancestor pops up. He just sticks out like a sore thumb to me. He is noticeable. And that ancestor is Slay MacCooper, the Scottish ancestor. He is beefy, he is burly, he's one of the strongest Coopers. He has a massive stone crook cane. And if we're talking about costumes, perhaps Sly could be as a shepherd or a bagpiper, or maybe he could have a leprechaun costume. That would be really interesting. Maybe a Braveheart type of costume. I don't know. There's so much potential. The next Cooper is also a very fascinating Cooper. We see him kind of in the background in the Thievius Raccoonus, but then he is mentioned by name in Sly 3 because we don't get much of his story. We just know his name and where he's from. The next ancestor that could be visited would be Thaddeus Winslow Cooper III. He is from Victorian London. We haven't gone to London yet in any of the Sly games, and I love the Victorian time period. Imagine a foggy overworld that Sly gets to explore. Perhaps the enemy is something akin to like Jack the Ripper or a Jack the Ripper type. And if we were going to talk about other potential enemies, for Slighton Common, he could have like corrupt pharaohs or a corrupt pharaoh that he has to take down. Or For Slay, it could be like a rival clan or, you know, the British. For the costume of the Victorian time period, it's kind of hard. There's nothing that really sticks out. Maybe a guard costume, which I don't know what that powers could be. Besides Sly just being incredibly dapper in the Victorian time period, nothing is really springing to mind of what he could wear or what those powers would be. The next one, which is, I'm kind of surprised that we haven't done it yet, or it wasn't in Sly 4, but it would be really fascinating if we went to Paris in like the 1970s. Why are we going to Paris in the 1970s? This would be potentially Sly Cooper's father's heyday, Connor Cooper. And perhaps Sly will get a disco outfit with, you know, the bell bottoms and an afro for a costume. And I don't know, he has dance moves as his power. I don't know. It's wacky and wild. It's the 70s, okay? Can you imagine Sly Cooper being able to see his father and like get to know him and like let his father know who he grew up to be? Or if they don't want to mess up the timeline, he would have a hard time not sharing that with his father and just kind of being like, oh yeah, you know, just awkward interactions and just like it means something to Sly, but Connor doesn't understand, like perhaps like some subtext in it or some phrases that Sly would be subtly telling his father that he loves him and he you know, is glad to see him, different things like that without giving it away. I mean, there's so much potential here for drama, some good storytelling, okay? I don't know if this one would be the last world or not. Those four are the Cooper ancestors that we know about. And before I get to the next Cooper, I should mention that there are two other Coopers that I think people are really excited about, but I think would not fit into the game themselves. We have Henriette and Otto. These two Coopers would not be ones to visit because they are so incredibly similar to areas we've visited before in other games. Henriette, we've had a pirate level in Sly 3, but then Otto Van Cooper, he looks like he's an ace. We again had a very similar gameplay world in Holland where we met Penelope, which, speaking of which, if we get a Sly 5, we could potentially dig into the Penelope Bentley relationship and maybe get Penelope back, a redemption arc going, like fix this really egregious thing, do something with it, fix it, please. There are time periods that are not mentioned within the Cooper legacy. Now there's tons of pages of the Thievius Raccoonus where they just kind of throw out names. They mention their technique that they invented. They don't mention their time period or what they did. But there are some time periods, some gaps that we can put some interesting characters into. One in particular, one gap, is between Slyton Common and the Middle Ages. So in the Middle Ages, we got Sir Galeth Cooper and the Arabian Cooper, I forgot his name. But those are in the Middle Ages. But in between that time, we have the Grecian and Roman empires. Perhaps we see a Roman Cooper and he takes down the Caesars. That would give us 5, and typically that's the general number that Sly games have, is they have 5 areas or 5 bosses or around that number. But we can have more than that. The Roman one I haven't really thought out, and it's not one I'm like super excited about, but if they were to throw in a Roman ancestor, I would not be opposed. I would not complain. The one I'm really excited about is much more modern. Now there's a time gap between Tennessee Kid Cooper, which is probably the most recent ancestor that we know of, and Connor Cooper. So we have the 1800s with Tennessee Kid Cooper and potentially the 60s and 70s with Connor. So there's a gap in there of modern history that we can use to get some Cooper ancestors. But the time period that I really want to highlight is the 1920s, where there's bank robberies, bank heists constantly, which is just so perfect for a game about a line of thieves. Can you imagine that one of the Cooper ancestors was a famous person who did a bunch of bank heists? So perhaps the criminals for this time period would be corrupt cops, which there were some back in that time period, or corrupt politicians that are running the city during this time. This Cooper ancestor can be based off of some of the famous people. Maybe we get a sly ancestor like Al Capone, which he did a lot of good things for the general public, despite him being a bank robber and being terrible and killing people. Or, and this is kind of my preference, but maybe we have an ancestor couple called Bonnie and Slide. Okay, I hate puns, but that one just kind of came up for me. It works. Like, they have puns within the Sly games already for the names, but I feel like a Bonnie and Slide, it would be so cool. I don't know what the costume can be off the top of my head. Perhaps there's a moonshiner outfit where he carries around a jug with XXX on it, or he has a police uniform, or perhaps a bank owner uniform. There's something there. There can be something there. He's the getaway driver. Perhaps we have Connor be the last one, his father be the last one, and maybe Bonnie and Slide right before that in America, like Chicago or something. So those are my ideas for time periods we can visit in potential Sly 5. If there was going to be one other thing I would like to add, which is kind of a minor thing, would be for Sly to run into Clockwork. Maybe Clockwork is the main antagonist of Sly 5, you know? Somehow Clockwork returned. Or maybe that's how it starts off, is Bentley and the gang go back to rescue Sly in ancient Egypt, and Clockwork somehow gets his hands on the time machine, a la Biff Tannen from Back to the Future 2, and he starts messing with the timeline. So we gotta figure this out, because Clockwork was first seen within Slyton Common's picture. All of that's kind of a joke. I mean, yes, we don't need Clockwork as the main villain again. He's already been the main villain technically for the first two. But I feel like there is a potential for a story there where it could work thematically. It's like, why are we going back to these time periods? And, you know, it could work that Clockwork somehow gets a hold of the time machine, learns of his future, and tries to avoid it, kind of thing. But I'm not actually wanting that. I'm just saying it could work if you were trying to be lazy. I do want Sly to run into Clockwork. We had those nice Easter eggs in Sly 4, which was really cool, but I want him to physically run into him again. Maybe, if we're being real crazy, he could be the first Cooper that causes all of the hate that Clockwork has for the Cooper family. That he just starts the hate. And Sly is the reason that Clockwork hates the Cooper family, which would be insane, because Clockwork personally murdered his father. And so the guilt that he would feel from that would be nuts. Again, that doesn't have to be the way it is. I just think it would be really interesting for him to actually personally run into Clockwork and not just see him in the distance. Kind of a weird video. I know Sly 4 is not very popular and people really don't, I'm sure people don't want a sequel. And I will say Sly 4 does has its issues, but I really want a Sly 5. And this is my idea for it. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Comment any ideas of time periods that you would want to visit. And I'll see you guys later. Now, I'm going to make like a tree and get out of here.